Have you noticed how certain public figures don't just participate in reality, they actively create alternative versions of it? It's been fascinating watching Candace Owens construct narrative frameworks that fundamentally reshape how events are perceived by different segments of our society. What strikes me isn't just the content of her claims, but how her narrative construction reveals profound patterns in our collective consciousness. Some view her as a courageous truth teller exposing hidden realities, others as a dangerous misinformation agent, and still others as a brilliant strategist who understands the power of counter-narrative in the attention economy. So today, we're going to be exploring Candace Owens, not as someone to either vilify or glorify, but as a case study in reality creation through narrative. By examining how she constructs alternative frameworks, from her recent Minneapolis shooting conspiracy claims to her broader patterns of reality reframing, we can gain profound insights into how consciousness shapes perception and how narrative becomes reality for different groups. Let's dive into what Candace Owens reveals about our collective relationship with truth, narrative, and the construction of reality itself. How does Candace Owens construct alternative realities through strategic narrative framing? Candace Owens represents a fascinating case study in narrative architecture, the process by which skilled communicators don't just interpret events, but construct entirely new reality frameworks around them. Her approach to the recent Minneapolis shooting demonstrates this pattern with remarkable clarity. Think of consciousness as a reality filtering system. We don't experience raw events, but interpreted versions of them. What Owens masterfully does is bypass established interpretative frameworks and construct alternative reality structures that resonate with specific audience predispositions. Notice her consistent pattern. When a traumatic event occurs, she doesn't merely question details, she reconstructs the entire reality framework. With the Minneapolis shooting, within hours, she wasn't just disputing facts, but proposing an entirely different reality structure, suggesting orchestration and hidden motives. This follows her established pattern with other major events where she's constructed alternative narratives that challenge conventional understanding. What's most revealing isn't whether her claims are factually accurate, but how she assembles narrative building blocks that create coherent alternative realities. She identifies pattern inconsistencies, highlights established contradictions, references historical precedents of deception, and connects dots in ways that mainstream narratives don't, creating a complete reality framework that feels more coherent to certain audiences than official versions. This narrative architecture demonstrates how reality itself is malleable through skilled storytelling. By examining her techniques, we glimpse how consciousness doesn't simply perceive reality, it actively constructs it through narrative frameworks that organize random events into meaningful patterns. Why do Owens' alternative narratives resonate so powerfully with specific audience segments? Candace Owens' narrative constructions wouldn't matter if they didn't resonate so powerfully with millions of people. This resonance reveals important patterns about collective consciousness and how different groups process reality through different filtering systems. Think of consciousness as operating on frequency patterns. We resonate with narratives that match our existing vibrational structure. Owens demonstrates remarkable skill in calibrating her narrative frequency to match the consciousness patterns of her audience. Look at how she incorporates specific resonant elements that activate existing belief structures, appeals to distrust of established institutions, pattern recognition that suggests coordination rather than coincidence, validation of audience suspicions that they're being manipulated, and empowerment through insider knowledge that others don't possess. I've observed how this resonance isn't primarily intellectual but energetic. Her narratives create an emotional coherence that feels more true than factual alternatives. For her audience, her explanations satisfy deeper psychological needs that mainstream narratives often ignore. The need for meaning in chaotic events, for agency in a world that feels manipulated, and for validation of intuitive suspicion. The most powerful aspect of this resonance isn't persuasion through facts, but alignment through narrative coherence. Her audience doesn't primarily follow her because she's proven her claims empirically, but because her reality construction aligns with their existing consciousness patterns and provides a framework that makes intuitive sense of their lived experience. This resonance dynamic doesn't mean her narratives are objectively accurate, but it does reveal how truth itself operates differently across consciousness spectrums. For some groups, emotional coherence and pattern alignment constitute a form of truth that transcends conventional factual verification. How do alternative narratives create separate reality bubbles that shape different consciousness communities? Candace Owens' narrative construction doesn't just influence individual beliefs. It contributes to the formation of distinct reality bubbles where different groups literally experience different versions of the same events. This represents a profound shift in our collective consciousness landscape. Think of consciousness as increasingly organized into separate reality ecosystems, each with internal coherence but decreasing compatibility with alternative systems. Owens' narrative approach both reflects and accelerates this consciousness segregation. Consider how her Minneapolis shooting narrative created an immediate reality split. For mainstream consciousness, the event represented one set of meanings and causes. For those resonating with her framework, the same event existed within an entirely different reality structure with different causal factors and implications. What's fascinating is how these separate reality bubbles develop their own internal coherence. Within each bubble, certain sources are trusted, certain pattern recognition is validated, and certain exploratory frameworks make intuitive sense. Evidence that contradicts the bubble's internal logic is processed not as corrective, but as further proof of manipulation by opposing forces. This consciousness segregation doesn't mean all reality constructions are equally valid, but it does reveal how traditional approaches to fact-checking often fail to address the deeper consciousness patterns that make alternative narratives compelling. When reality itself is constructed differently across consciousness communities, simply asserting facts without addressing underlying narrative structures rarely bridges the divide. How might we navigate a world of competing reality constructions without abandoning discernment? The narrative dynamics exemplified by Candace Owens presents both challenges and opportunities for our collective consciousness evolution. Rather than simply dismissing alternative narratives or uncritically accepting them, we can develop more sophisticated approaches to navigating competing reality structures. Think of consciousness evolution as requiring new integration capacities, the ability to understand multiple reality frameworks without losing our discernment about their relative validity. Owens' approach challenges us to develop exactly these capacities. Look at how traditional responses to alternative narratives often fail. Fact-checking alone doesn't address the deeper resonance patterns that make these narratives compelling. Dismissing alternative views as simply misinformation fails to recognize the legitimate pattern recognition that sometimes exists within them. Uncritically accepting counter-narratives abandons necessary critical thinking. I've observed how the most promising integration approach follows a different pattern. First, we develop the capacity to temporarily enter different reality frameworks without judgment, just to understand their internal coherence. Then we examine the evidence and pattern recognition from multiple perspectives, acknowledging both mainstream blind spots and alternative narrative overreach. Finally, we cultivate discernment that can distinguish between legitimate pattern recognition and overextended conspiracy thinking. The most valuable consciousness evolution isn't about determining whether Owens is right or wrong in absolute terms. It's about developing more sophisticated discernment that can navigate a world where reality itself is increasingly constructed through competing narratives. This evolution invites us to ask deeper questions. How do we maintain critical thinking without dismissing alternative perspectives entirely? How do we distinguish between legitimate pattern recognition and paranoid connection making? How do we acknowledge institutional blind spots without abandoning factual grounding? What consciousness capacities allow us to navigate between reality bubbles without losing our discernment? By engaging these questions with both openness and discernment, we contribute to an evolving collective consciousness that can navigate narrative complexity without abandoning the pursuit of truth. Candace Owens' approach to reality construction through narrative offers a powerful mirror for examining how consciousness shapes perception and how different groups experience fundamentally different versions of the same events. By understanding her narrative architecture and resonance dynamics, we gain insights not just about one public figure, but about the nature of reality construction itself in our fragmented information landscape. The most valuable approach isn't rushing to either embrace or reject her alternative narratives, but using this case study to develop more sophisticated frameworks for navigating a world of competing reality constructions. This represents a critical evolution in consciousness, maintaining critical discernment while understanding the deeper patterns that make alternative narratives compelling to different groups. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this perspective. How do you navigate between competing reality frameworks while maintaining your own discernment? What techniques help you understand alternative viewpoints without abandoning critical thinking? Share your insights in the comments below. If this nuanced approach resonated with you, hit that like and subscribe button to join our community. Also hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next video. And of course, until next time, remember that our relationship with reality is always mediated through narrative frameworks. By becoming conscious of these frameworks, we gain the freedom to navigate them with greater wisdom. Stay beautiful, stay discerning, and as always, stay conscious in the field.